from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. We have two tales for you tonight, about how things work a little different at the airport, and a Soviet expedition that finds they may be the subjects rather than the observers. Our first story for the evening comes from Derek Allen Jones. Derek Allen Jones spends nights working in a warehouse in Kansas and darker nights writing speculative fiction. His work has appeared in Apex, the Saturday Evening Post, Gamut, and more. Find it all at DerekAllenJones.com. Children of the night, join me for Derek Allen Jones's Everything That Was All of Me, first published in Spooky Magazine, October 2024.
It may well go on forever. The speckled brown of the carpet, the pale yellow of the ceiling, the bright white of the fluorescent tubes, and the dull beige of the square pillars. And every third pillar is a dead gray screen that normally would be glowing with arrival and departure times. A pillar, a screen. A pillar, a screen. A perfect mirror image of each stares back from across the center aisle until they all blend together into a singularity on the false horizon. The music that drones in the distance, where the gates are open and the people bustle, is little more than a hum in this wing where I've tucked myself away, an indistinguishable melody, broken only occasionally by the crackling of a voice in which I can't find any words. I wonder how long I've been sitting here. I wonder how long I have left. I know the minutes have grown into hours, but I can't begin to guess how many. I pull the ticket from my jacket pocket to check the departure time again, and I look down at the watch on my wrist, only to find that it hasn't been wound. The hands are lifeless and unhelpful. But I suppose it doesn't matter. As many hours may have passed, I know that I have plenty more before time becomes a concern. There's some comfort, though, in the quiet here, and in the silence and the symmetry. So I lean my head back on the blue vinyl of the bench and begin counting fluorescent tubes. I don't make it to a dozen before I let my eyes fall closed. When I wake, there's little indication that any time at all has passed. I find my head still resting on the vinyl of that bench, and I find the music still droning on from somewhere in the distance. My eyes are still pointed upward at the pale yellow of the ceiling, and they burn and blur in the bright white light of those fluorescent tubes. I lower my head and I shake it, and I blink hard as I try to find focus, and my gaze comes to rest on the center of the bench that sits across from mine. I realize then that something sits there where nothing should have been. Something, or almost something, the implication of something. My eyes are locked on the thing, or rather, on the space where the thing must be. But even as I stare, any sight of it seems to be slipping away from me. But it's there. I know it's there. I can feel it. I can almost see it. And with every second that passes, the thing comes a little closer to what could reasonably be called a shape. an outline. The shape of a man. There's no color and no detail and no corporeal form to the shape, but this shape of a man is there. The first thing that comes into focus, into unquestionable existence, the first thing that I can truly see in this shape of a man is the eyes. And I know those eyes. Those eyes are looking back at me now, the way they do from the mirror every morning. I want to gasp. I want to scream. I want to ask him how or why or what in the hell he is. But the lips that I can't open now spread into a smile across his face. Across my face. Across the face that he is wearing as he sits and smirks at me. I want to run, but I can't seem to find enough of myself to stand. I want to raise my hand to my head, to feel how much is left of me. But the hand that moves is his. Or it's mine, or whoever the hand belongs to. It hangs at the end of an arm that isn't connected to me anymore. He reaches that hand into the pocket of the jacket that he now wears, and he glances at the ticket he finds there before looking down at the watch. He frowns with my lips, and he shakes my head in playful disapproval, and he winks my eye as he stands and turns to make his way down that endless aisle. The nothing that is left of me watches as everything that was all of me disappears into a false horizon. Everything is quiet now and symmetrical and still. It may well go on forever. The speckled brown of the carpet, the pale yellow of the ceiling. A pillar, a screen. The drone of music in the distance. I wonder how long I've been here.
That was Derek Allen Jones's Everything That Was All of Me, as read by Dan Gurzynski. Dan is a broadcast and audio engineer by trade and has worked on many projects for local public stations. Lately, he's been recording literary works for LibriVox, as well as Tales to Terrify, and has narrated several audiobooks for Audible. Thank you, Dan. Our second tale tonight comes from Damir Salkovic. Damir is the author of the story collection Collapse Years, 2 novels, and short stories featured in multiple horror magazines and anthologies. An auditor by trade and traveler by heart, he does his best writing 30+ thousand feet in the air and in the terminals of far-flung airports. He lives in Virginia with his wife. When not writing fiction, he reviews horror movies, discusses books, and shares unsolicited opinions on just about everything on his blog, Darker Realities. Listen with me, children of the night, to Damir Salkovic's Exit Horizon, first published in Lovecraft E-Zine, issue 34, March 2015.
On the 4th morning of the expedition, Gorakov realized that the soldiers were gone. He'd risen at dawn and crawled out of the tent to relieve himself, his teeth chattering. The pitch-black Siberian sky was giving way to a deep blue in the east. Dim gray light revealed a muddy trail leading from the campsite into the blasted valley ahead, clogged with dead, fallen trees. Low-ridged hills rimmed the horizon, their slopes covered in birch and pine. There was no sentry in front of the soldier's tent, no telltale ember of a cigarette. Gorakov hesitated, lifted the door flap. The cots were empty, the packs and AK-47 assault rifles lined up neatly against the far canvas wall. The backpack radio sat on the sturdy, foldable table. The interior of the tent smelled faintly of gun oil and unwashed bodies. Gorakov closed the flap and stepped away from the empty tent, trying to make sense of what he'd just seen. He scanned the devastated forest beyond the campsite, half expecting to see the missing soldiers troop out of the stripped, blackened deadfall. Nothing but silence. The swamp seemed devoid of life. The huge ZIL-135 truck stood on the other side of the camp, all 8 tires slashed and sinking into the mud, an acrid-smelling stain spreading beneath it. Gorakov rapped on the window of the cramped cab, straining to see into the murk. There was no response. A chill tightened Gorakov's stomach. He walked around the truck, but the survey equipment was in place and seemingly intact, mounted on crates in the 10-ton flatbed and covered with tarps, stamped with the logo of the Krasnoyarsk Geological Institute. From the front of the truck came a rustling noise, a strangled curse. Chertok, the other geologist, emerged from the second tent, his long limbs tangling in the cords. "Mitya, got a cigarette?" Chertov called in a low voice. Then his eyes took in the damaged truck and widened. He took a clumsy step in the direction of the soldier's tent. "There's no one there," Gorakov said. His legs felt heavy. He sat on a log and reached inside his jacket, passed the other man a cardboard-tipped Bellamore. "They're all gone. Driver, too. Someone has disabled the truck." "All of them?" Chertok reached for the cigarette slowly, like a man in a dream. "But where?" Gorakov shrugged and blew a circle of blue smoke. The air was heavy with the threat of rain. A thin, white mist rose from the depths of the swamp, creeping between the felled boles, the withered, leafless branches, the dead roots reaching into the sky like claws. He felt very small and very alone. Kilometers of marshy wilderness stretched between the camp and the nearest human habitation. Wherever the soldiers had gone, he didn't think they were coming back. A noise came from the tent, and Bogolyubov appeared in the opening, followed by Yasensin, the mineralogist. It didn't take them long to notice the missing men, the ruin of the military truck. Gorakov smoked in contemplative silence, the cold seeping into his bones, and watched the KGB officers scramble around the campsite. "Who did this?" Bogolyubov opened the door of the cramped cab and popped the hood of the truck. Something had eaten through the engine block. The inside was a mass of twisted, corroded metal, covered in a dark brown sludge. The KGB officer's small, dark eyes blinked rapidly behind thick glasses. "Where are the soldiers? The driver?" "Gone." Gorakov stubbed out his cigarette. He tried to keep his face impassive, but his insides churned with raw fear. "What do you mean, gone? Gone where?" "Go look for them if you want," Chertok said with a sneer. Bogolyubov was a minor KGB functionary from an obscure village near Bratsk, a petty bureaucrat with an inflated sense of self-worth who took an inordinate pride in his appointment as the official leader of the expedition. Over the course of the 3-day journey into the southern swamp of the Tuguska River, he'd succeeded in antagonizing everyone but the thin, withdrawn Yasensin, who seemed lost in his own world. Yet with Chertok there was something else, a black hatred seething just beneath the surface, barely contained. Gorakov looked up at the younger geologist's face and didn't like what he saw there. Bogolyubov's mouth worked silently. His gaze flicked from the blasted trees to the distant hillsides, back to the empty tent. Anger and confusion were slowly giving way to fear. "It's not safe here," Chertok said. "We have to go back." "To Vanavara," Gorakov inclined his head in the direction of the dirt road they'd come by. On foot? Leave all this equipment behind? The higher echelons would eat us alive. Comrade Bogolyubov would probably end up in a corrective labor colony. Maybe they're on patrol? Said the quiet Yasensin, staring off into the tangle of fallen lumber. Open your eyes. Bogolyubov shot a baleful glare at Gorakov, who remained unperturbed. They've been ambushed in the woods. The enemy is near, waiting to strike, to pick us off one by one. Reactionary bandits, maybe even American saboteurs. The polo truck seemed to have recovered some of his composure. They destroyed the truck because they want us to walk. If we leave, we'll be playing right into their hands. Not if we split up and scatter, Chertok said. The first of us to reach Vanavara could request an emergency extraction and wait for the others. We stay here. It makes no sense. Gorakov rubbed his eyes. The light was playing tricks on him. He thought he saw a hint of movement in the dead trees. There are no signs of struggle. All the weapons and gear are still in the tent. They, whoever they are, even left us the radio. Is it working? Asked Yasensin. Haven't tried it yet, Chertok said and clapped Gorakov on the shoulder. Mitya was a radio operator in the war. He'll know how to get it running. They gathered around the table in the soldiers' tent. Gorakov fiddled with the radio unit, trying to establish contact with the army base in Bratsk. The device appeared to be in working order, but the receiver yielded only static and strange, hissing, whistling noises. Nothing. Gorakov pushed the headset away and stared at the others. Interference? Or the damn thing's broken? What could they want from us? Yasensin sat on a cot and buried his head in his hands. We're scientists, not spies. We don't design rocket engines or nuclear bombs. We tap stones with a hammer. Don't be a fool. Bogolyubov eyed him with disgust. This expedition was commissioned by the higher echelons, organized in absolute secrecy. The first secretary himself has expressed his support. I have it on the highest authority. A comrade from the basement. Basement? The Paranormal Research Directorate. Bogolyubov huffed with indignant exasperation. There's something going on in the valley that's got to do with a research program they're running. The directorate got wind of it from the Kulik expedition 40 years ago. Reports mentioned strange lights at the impact site, glowing sod, odd crooked saplings growing under the dead trees, restricted documents, available only to those with special clearance. Lights? Asked Gorakov. From the meteorite impact. That theory has been discarded, Yasensin said. There's no impact crater, no trace of a meteorite in the area. The working hypothesis is one of a nuclear airburst or an antimatter comet. Whatever it was, it left something behind. The KGB officer traced a stubby finger over a photo reconnaissance map with the Tunguska impact site outlined in red ink. Some kind of radioactive energy in the soil. Special kind, not like the one in the bombs. He's making it up, said Chertok. His face was pale and beaded with sweat. If this area was radioactive, they wouldn't... No one told us anything, Yasensin said. This is classified information. Strict need-to-know basis only. Bogolyubov folded his arms. A smug expression crossed his face. The enemy is stalking us to gather full intelligence. They are certain we'll find something, but afraid of what that something could be. As long as we stay put, we have nothing to fear. So, we wait. Someone will come for us. I'm not waiting around to see what happens. Chertok picked up one of the rifles left behind by the soldiers and moved toward the opening of the tent. Before the others knew what was happening, Bogolyubov barred his way, face flushed with fury. That's an order, comrade. The geologist towered a head above the KGB officer, but Bogolyubov didn't flinch. If you so much as set foot outside this tent, I will have you arrested. In case you haven't noticed, you're in no position to give orders. Chertok leveled the rifle at the smaller man's chest. A strange calm had settled into his voice. "The situation has changed." "I'll tell you what's changed." Blinded by anger, Bogolyubov seemed not to notice the weapon. "I won't allow—" The scream drowned out the last of his words, the high-pitched keening of an animal in agony coming from outside. Panic froze the 4 men in the tent, turning their bowels to liquid. The cry became a voice, babbling and pleading. It was too faint to make out the words, but there was no mistaking the raw anguish in it. Yusensin blanched and shrank back against the canvas of the tent. "That's Semyonov," he said, covering his ears. "The driver, he's out there. They have him." "Nobody leaves this tent," Bogolyubov said, but without conviction. He stared at the muzzle of the rifle in front of him as if seeing it for the first time. Chertok pushed past him and through the tent flaps. Gorakov stepped in between them, rifle in hand. "We're going to help him," he said to Bogolyubov. "You can stay here and wait for the soldiers to return, or for the extraction team to arrive from Bratsk. But you'll stay here alone." The KGB agent glared at him, but said nothing. The dying man screamed again, closer this time. Yusensin moaned and curled up on the cot. There was a dull, vacant gleam in his eyes. "Get up, Alexei." Gorakov pulled the mineralogist to his feet and thrust a rifle in his hands. "We can't stay here." "You know nothing," Bogolyubov said sullenly. He fiddled with the catch of his Marikov pistol. For a moment Gorakov thought the little man meant to threaten them into staying, but Bogolyubov kept his head down and walked outside without meeting his eye. The sun was up when they left the campsite, the slopes of the hills flaming with autumn colors. They picked their way slowly through the maze of uprooted, pulped trees. Huge Siberian birches and pines, leaf-stripped and burnt, lay scattered like matchsticks. The outline of the devastation zone was etched into Gorakov's mind. A scorched stain on the landscape, 70 kilometers wide at its broadest point. He took his bearings by the hills ringing the valley. The compass they found in the soldier's tent was broken, the needle spinning wildly. The driver's screams were growing weaker. Gorakov hoped the man would be dead before they found him. They had nothing to treat his injuries with, and the nearest hospital might as well have been on the moon. Yusensin was close to breaking. Gorakov didn't think his mind would survive the shock of seeing the driver tortured. Mud squelched under their boots. Black, charred branches dripped with moisture. The mist had burned off, but Gorakov could still see thin, pale tendrils crawl through the undergrowth, hovering in the corner of his vision. Twisted, stunted plants sprang up from the piles of deadfall. Flesh-colored lichen colonized the dead, broken trunks. He wondered about what Bogolyubov had said, the glowing mud, the malformed vegetation, the radiation. It was too late to turn back now. An hour or so later, they halted for a meal of cold rations taken from the tent. The cries had ceased. Poisoned silence lay over the swamp like a shroud. Gorakov decided to go east. He thought that was where the screams had come from last, but he couldn't be sure. The dead forest played tricks with sound, pulling him in deeper, confounding his senses. "Which way?" asked Chertok, gripping the stock of the rifle. As if in response, a thin, high wail tore through the silence, setting their teeth on edge. Gorakov motioned with his head. He'd been right, east, and much closer now, coming from behind a stand of toppled pines. They scrabbled on all fours under immense trunks scarred and scorched by the explosion, through misshapen ferns and drapes of nacreous moss. Gorakov rose first, blood roaring in his ears, a mud-covered, ash-blackened apparition, sighting down the barrel of the AK-47. The clearing behind the trees was empty. The 4 men exchanged a bewildered look. Bogolyubov prodded the desiccated boughs with the stock of his rifle, his face blank, his eyes vacant. Gorokhov turned to look back the way they'd come, but the fallen trunks seemed to grow closer, to change shape. Shadows stretched across the forest floor, pulled in hollows and recesses like tar. Out beyond the trees, something gave voice again. The timbre was the same, but now a low, mocking note had crept into it, a low, gurgling chuckle that made their skin crawl. "We're going back," Gorokhov said, fighting back the terror that surged into his throat, threatening to choke him. Chertok jerked his head in the direction of the sound. "The driver!" "That's not the driver." Gorokhov moved quickly, motioning for the others to follow. His mind dimly recognized they were in a trap. They had to get out before it closed around them. He focused on the thought, pushing down the questions squirming at the back of his brain. Monstrous piles of deadfall loomed around him, so similar as to be indistinguishable. His gaze sought the blue contours of the hills, trusting his sense of direction to take them back to the campsite. They walked on for what seemed like hours. The pale sun had crossed the autumn horizon. Wide streaks of indescribable color arced across the sky, waves welling up from an unseen ocean of light. A dull, sickly yellow luminescence seeped from the dead trees. Gorokhov saw it strip the flesh off the men's faces, exposing the grinning skulls beneath. He closed his eyes, but the image persisted. Delirium, he thought. Wherever the maze led them, there seemed to be no way out. Chertok had been bringing up the rear, lost in thought. Suddenly he crouched down and picked up a small, shiny object half buried in the mud. He held it up for the others to see. An empty ration can that had once contained peaches. Yasensin glanced down in despair, turned over another can with his boot. "Circles!" His voice was high, strained. "We've been walking around in circles." Bogolyubov howled with laughter, the sound shrill and immense in the silence. He doubled over and sat down on a stump, removing his spectacles to dab at his eyes with a dirty hand. Chertok stepped forward and raised his rifle, his face a pallid mask of terror and hatred. The sight of the weapon sent the KGB officer into new convulsions, tears sliding down his stubbled cheeks. "Quit that, you son of a whore!" The geologist's finger tightened on the trigger. "You don't understand!" Bogolyubov's elation was spiraling into hysteria, laughter and sobs coming in equal measure. "It's a sham! All of it! A joke! I took inventory before we loaded the truck in Bratsk. The lading list came signed, but I did it anyway. I've always been thorough, you see." "What are you talking about?" asked Gorokhov. The little man had lost his mind, that much was clear. Still, his words stirred up a vague unease. "The equipment!" Bogolyubov was babbling now, his chin wet with spit. "The excavators, the radiation counters, the surveying instruments. Oh, it looks like the real thing when it's under tarps, all right, but it's worthless. Junk and scrap metal held together with old cables." The KGB officer's eyes were glassy and red. His lips stretched in a rictus grin. A Potemkin's village, if you will. Nothing that the higher echelons hate more than a waste of socialist property. The comrades of the basement didn't plan on us coming back. I should have known. I read your files. "What about our files?" The rifle slipped from Yasensin's fingers. He made no attempt to retrieve it. "What was in there?" "Expendable," the KGB officer cackled. "All of us. We've been selected with great care. No family members to ask unpleasant questions. A transfer memorandum or two, a note scribbled into a labor booklet, and it'll be as if we never existed." "You're a lying bastard," Chertok said between clenched teeth. "Am I?" Bogolyubov stared up at the younger man. Slowly, almost languidly, his hand went to the McElroy at his side and released the holster catch. "Maybe I am, or maybe I am the only one here willing to face the truth." He waved the snub-nosed pistol absently, pointing it in no particular direction. "I think there's only one way to find out." Before the stricken scientists could react, the KGB officer pressed the muzzle to his temple and pulled the trigger. There was nothing but a dry click. Bogolyubov stared at the black hole, a dazed look on his face. He squeezed the trigger 2 more times, then collapsed into a fit of thin, shrieking laughter. "What does this mean?" Yasensin's frantic eyes raced between the 2 geologists. His face was working with horror. "It needs us!" The KGB officer clawed at his eyes, tittering with idiot glee. "The thing from the swamp! It'll be here soon. The comrades want us to stay alive, to be changed, remade." Chertok swung his rifle like a club and struck the KGB officer on the side of the head. Bogolyubov rolled off the stump and landed in the mud with a wet, heavy thump. Dark blood seeped from the wound, but the little man was laughing. He made no attempt to protect himself from the blows that rained across his back. Chertok flung himself atop the prostrate figure, bellowing like a savage, pinning him to the ground. He grabbed a jagged rock with both hands and brought it down on Bogolyubov's skull with all the strength he could muster. There was a sickening sound like overripe fruit thrown against a wall. The rock rose and fell, over and over again. Chips of bloody bone spattered Chertok's face and arms. Bogolyubov's brains gleamed gray in the black mud. Gorakov staggered backward, feeling his mind sideslip. Yasensin was on his knees, retching. Jumbled words, a sort of prayer, came out between long spasms. There was no end to this but madness. Chertok rose from the bloody heap, a filthy, gore-slick revenant, teeth bared in a snarl. He held the dripping rock in one hand. Gorakov lifted the useless rifle. He tried to stand straight, but his limbs were filled with lead. Behind him came the sound of running feet, Yasensin plunging into the tangled undergrowth, crashing through the brittle branches. "He was right," Chertok said with a wry smile. "Did you know there are other theories about what happened here? That the explosion didn't come down from the sky, but up from the ground? A microscopic black hole, a doorway to some other universe. No one would admit it, not officially, but there is talk. Strange radiation, unexplainable frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. Could it be that the committee is keeping secrets from the higher echelons?" He advanced a few steps, his bloodied face pensive. "That there's something in this swamp older than man, maybe older than the earth itself, something that must be fed from time to time, if it's to remain buried?" "Stay away," Gorakov said, hearing the quiver in his voice. The insane sky spun around him, the scorched forest shimmering in the lurid radiance of the day. He started to back away, half expecting Chertok to come after him, but the other man simply stood with his hands hanging at his sides. Droplets of blood from the stone pattered on dead leaves. "That's what they needed us for," he said, staring into the middle distance as if seeing something Gorakov couldn't. "To feed what waits inside." Gorakov had a sudden vision of a line of soldiers marching through the blasted woods, staggering through the mud, their limbs moving automatically. A hillock at the epicenter of the blast zone, a wet hole gaping at its center, the men vanishing into it one by one. Inside the hole, galaxies dying and being born in nebulae of blazing gases, hollow, long-dead stars careening through the frozen void. A terrible fire spreading from the hillock, incandescence without end, illuminating the world in one last, fierce light. "Ever hungry?" Chertok knelt in the mud and began stuffing his mouth with leaves. He chewed methodically. Shadows lengthened, danced around him, the woods closing in, shedding all pretense of concealment. Gorakov turned and ran. Night came and went, or what he thought was night, mad auroras rolling across a purple sky, stars shuddering in their wake. He stumbled on aimlessly over the fallen trees, letting the forest take him where it wanted him to go. Crude, unfinished faces formed in the ravaged bark of the trunks, gazing upon him with terrible mirth. The voice they'd thought was the driver's had returned, gibbering and chanting, forever out of sight. Gorakov recalled the photo reconnaissance map, 40-odd kilometers from the campsite to the epicenter of the blast. A long walk by any reckoning, but he was in no hurry. He found a rill of a stream and lapped water like a dog. The image of Chertok cramming leaves into his mouth came to him. He rose on unsteady feet and moved on, shaking with silent hilarity. Reality was melting in long smears of fantastic color. The feet churning the mud and the bleeding hands clawing through the deadfall belonged to someone else, a billion light years away. Small fires burned in the distance. Nomad tribes from beyond the valley gathering to take part in the age-old ceremony. In his reading about the 1927 expedition, he'd learned that the native Evenks and Yakuts shunned the devastation zone, but still engaged in singing and dancing revels in strange circles of stone on the surrounding hills, ancient rituals held to appease their savage gods. The notion struck him as absurd. This god needed no appeasing, a blind, primeval force, a demiurge creating or destroying at random, black chaos pouring over the rim of the universe. He came upon the corpse, face down in a puddle, and turned it over. The mineralogist had gnawed his wrists open. The dark stickiness beneath him wasn't water. There was a bluish bruise at the back of his head, a clotted puncture wound at its center. Gorakov felt a twinge of pity, to have come so far only to be denied the revelation. A change was coming. His nerve endings thrummed with the expectation. The agony would be unutterable. The pleasure far more so. Minutes passed, or days. He gazed upon the epicenter of the blast. The trees on the small rise stood upright amid the devastation, bark-stripped, naked pillars reaching up into the bilious sky. A structure reared between them, a dolmen of 2 flat upright stones supporting a huge flat slab, blanketed with moss. Stunted, deformed vines and pale lichens spread through fissures in the stone. Grotesque vegetation grew around the monument with hideous vigor. At the center of the dolmen lay the pit from his vision. There was movement in the entrance, a figure, not quite like a man, unfinished, a whirl of crimson inside a dark cloud, thousands of eyes watching from the dead trees. Gorakov walked up the hillock, the last vestiges of sanity sloughing off him like a snakeskin. The hole yawned beneath his feet, oozing darkness, a dark, dank cavity that smelled of moist, decaying leaves and earth. Constellations swirled in its depths, a luminous veil cast across the abyss of the outer dark. The unbound anatomy of time and space unraveled like a frayed fabric. He could sense the mindless hunger of the thing below, its madness blowing across the starry gulf like a fetid wind. He took a step, then another. Across the threshold, into the warm darkness.
That was Damir Salkovic's Exit Horizon, as read by Douglas Gwilym. Douglas Gwilym grew up in what might vaguely be referred to as Pittsburgh and is sucked closer and closer to the city's center as the years pass. He's logged hundreds of hours as a narrator for LibriVox. Douglas Gwilym reads Tales of the Proto-Weird on YouTube, and with a small audiobook publisher. He's logged thousands of hours reading to please an entity known only as the Creature, which may or may not regard him as a parent. He's a singer, bandleader, bassist, and recording musician when the fates allow, and is often held responsible for a weird fiction rock opera called Bonnie Wipes It All Clean. He lives with the artist Deborah Thompson Williams and the Creature in a house at the edge of the woods. His other life is as a Bram Stoker Award-nominated short story author and anthologist. Johnny Compton, author of Spite House, calls his latest anthology, Novus Monstrum, mysterious, merciless, mirthful, and superb. Champion Mojo storyteller Joe Lansdale calls his upcoming short story collection dark dynamite that will knock you in the tall, wet weeds. Hear him read his own work on web shows like Galactic Terrors and The Story Hour, and always tip your server. Thank you, Douglas. Well, children of the night, the hour is late, and we've run out of tales to tell. For now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D. Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales, too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we seek revenge from beyond with more Tales to Terrify.